Welcome back. Hope you're doing really good today. And we have three comments actually that we're going to talk about today. And one is from Ole, number one, and another one from Jina, and another one from, of course. And let's just go in order here. So the first one is from 8 hours ago, and this is Ole commenting on episode 200. Actually, you know what? Let me open here. 213 it is. And what is that about? Let me read here. Oh, yeah. Insomnia number 213. It's called Brett Word about CBTi. He worried that it wouldn't work for him, but it did. It's a good episode, 213. So it's a success story, really. So definitely tune into that one if you have not. Now, the comment is, hi Daniel, can you define what you believe is quote-unquote committing to the work regarding CBTi? Absolutely. And I don't think it was in this context in this episode, but I've made another episode where I talk about like what I often hear, like kind of recurring themes when somebody has gotten past their insomnia and are doing well. And one of them is really committing to CBTi, or as I put it in this one, committing to the work. And what do I mean by that? Well, that really pertains to like the behavioral therapy component of CBTi. So there's kind of two components for those of you that are new here. Cognitive is like learning about what causes insomnia, learning about sleep physiology and things of that nature. And the behavioral component is mainly focused really on this technique called bedtime restriction, or what is also unfortunately known as sleep restriction, which is spending less time in bed, as well as stimulus control, which is leaving the bed if you can't, if you're not falling asleep, and then only returning when you're feeling sleepy again. There's much more to it than that. But to again contextualize here, committing to the work. What do I mean by that? Well, it is really the following. It is, if you decided that you're going to get up at 6 a.m., then you should get up at 6 a.m. even if you had a terrible night. If you decide you're going to get up at 6 a.m. and then you're not going to sleep during the day, it is making sure you don't sleep during the day. Really, I feel like when it comes to insomnia, particularly the first couple of weeks, anything is allowed, in terms of like making sure you don't fall asleep. So if you feel like, oh my gosh, I'm going to fall asleep, get up on your toes, walk around, get out, expose yourself to light, snack, take a shower, like anything is allowed at this point. And now what else? Well, the stimulus control part, which for most people is the really hardest part, which is if you're not falling asleep when you go to bed, or if you wake up and can't fall back asleep, then try to leave the bed and bedroom so that you can kind of reassociate the bed and bedroom with reassociate the bed and bedroom with sleeping again. And that is pretty much what I meant with saying like committing to the work. And by the way, if you're new to the channel, like stimulus control, which is that part of like leave the bed if you can't sleep, that's usually what people find the hardest part. And I'm just gonna sneak this one in there. I talk about this a lot, but there's a good technique I learned from Michael Schwartz where he says, if you wake up and you're feeling like I'm awake again, but I don't really want to leave the bed, you could also try to just imagine yourself in the really pleasant surroundings, and stay in bed. And if that comes easy to you, if you kind of like drift off in your thoughts and you're in a pleasant mental space, then you can stay in bed. You're probably going to fall back asleep again. But if you're getting frustrated and annoyed, then you should really try to leave the bed. So a little extra comment there. Okay, next one is a comment from also 8 hours ago. It's actually on the first ever episode here, or maybe the second one. Let me actually check. This is a comment on Insomnia Insight number 1, bedtime restriction. Yep, that's the one. And this is from Jina Cates, yeah. So she says, hi, I just stumbled upon your channel and I'm so grateful. Super glad to read that. And even just the first part, when somebody writes, I just stumbled upon your channel, that makes me so happy. I'm so glad people are finding it and finding value here and things that are helpful. So thanks so much for saying this, Gina, and thanks so much for this comment. Let's read on. I have a quick question. Um, would you treat insomnia caused by concussion in the same way you would, quote unquote, regular insomnia? With CBTi, question mark. I've struggled with insomnia off and on for a year, but I recently suffered a mild concussion and have been having insomnia every night. I'm excited to begin trying some of these CBTi techniques, but wondered what you thought about post-concussive insomnia. Thank you. So, I want to say this little disclaimer here. Nothing I say here is medical advice to you, Gina, or anyone else. So what I'm going to say next here is like, think of it as generally, like anybody that has trouble sleeping, has a concussion, and worsens their sleep. What do I feel is kind of like the general advice to anybody like that, or my thoughts on that rather? Well, my thoughts are the following. The short answer is yes. I've never come across any literature saying that somebody who has had more trouble sleeping after a concussion, there are any risks with that, or I generally speaking, when it comes to CBTi, there are two things that are often named as like you should be careful when you apply CBTi, and that's if you have a seizure disorder or if you have like bipolar disorder. Theoretically, not getting enough sleep can cause seizure disorders, seizures, as well as like manic episodes. And when I say theoretically, I mean what you're doing when you're doing CBTi is not actually restricting anybody's sleep. You're restricting time in bed. Most people with insomnia are not getting much sleep at baseline, and thereby spending less time in bed rarely causes less sleep. And I've never ever come across like a patient that's had any like negative consequences of CBTi. So just sharing that. So going back to the comment here from Gina, yeah, again, I don't see that there's any contraindications or special circumstances here. And I want to comment a little bit more, which is if you, Gina, like as you explore my channel, you will come across me saying something akin to the following: that almost everyone, I would say almost everyone with insomnia does identify their own insomnia as a little bit different for many reasons. Classic ones are like, I have no problem falling asleep, but I can't stay asleep, or the opposite. I have trouble falling asleep, but once I fall asleep, there's no problem. Or my insomnia started after an episode of food poisoning, or I am fine if I take this supplement, but I just can't sleep at all without it. Or another common one, I'm never sleepy. I sleep very little, 2 or 3 hours, but I just never feel sleepy. There's so many kind of variations of insomnia, and from the inside perspective, from the perspective of somebody that is developing insomnia, it often feels kind of really bizarre and strange and unusual. But from the outside perspective, from somebody that for somebody that takes care of people with insomnia, you recognize that it is very, very little variation. It is. I want to say. I honestly want to say that I'm never surprised. I like this. There's almost never a case where I'm like, I don't understand this. That is so rare. It's almost always like, yeah, it is the hyperarousal, it is the anxiety, it is the kind of poor habits. It's really always the same kind of culprit down, that is the underlying cause for insomnia. And why do I highlight this? Why do I talk about it? Well, when somebody thinks that believes that their insomnia is very different and special and unique, etc., then they often tend to look for a solution that's kind of like unique and special. And also, like, the more unusual or bizarre you think your insomnia is, and by the way, Gina, like that's not what comes across in this comment at all, but it's just a general comment again. For people that think their insomnia is very unusual, bizarre, etc., they often have a hard time kind of accepting that it is not that it is regular insomnia and that CBTi will work for them. But if they can do that, if people can see like, what, I see this pattern, other people have very similar trouble sleeping, then I think that also makes you more likely to be successful at CBTi, because then you feel like, I just have regular insomnia, and what works for other people is going to work for me. And so, I think it's really helpful to look at your own insomnia as nothing special, unique, bizarre, strange, etc. Um, so hope this comment or reply was helpful to you, Gina, and anybody else that is tuning in. And with that said, I want to go to the last one here, which came in just 46 minutes ago. And when was this? Was this last week? I believe it was last week that, of course, one of the viewers here or listeners, if you're on a podcast, shared that he'd been doing pretty well, kind of like self-soothing, getting better with sleep, but then was going to start a new job, which involved like shift work, and got really nervous about this. Didn't sleep at all one night, and I made like a reply to that where I said, that I was very sorry to hear that, of course, and that sometimes a sleepless night can be turned into positive if you kind of like manage to get through it, and then you kind of start fearing sleep less, etc. And then I didn't hear from, of course, a couple days, but I was thinking a lot about this, and I was kind of hoping that things would go well. So anyway, here is the comment from 46 minutes ago. I don't know if you cover psychology on here, but I realized just recently how fear of failure plays a big role in my insomnia. Because I don't want to fail at a job or fail with my friendships, and it causes panic at night where I am very vulnerable. I ended up losing the new job I had only after a couple of days of work, went 3 days with little sleep, and I couldn't take it anymore, so I quit. But I did think there's something with me fearing how people will think of me and how worthless I feel and how much pressure there is to feel worth something, to have a job and friends who respect me, so I'm not sure if you have insight on any of that. First of all, thanks for sharing this. I think it is so important to talk about this. I feel that one reason that people with insomnia often feel kind of isolated is that nobody wants to talk about these things, and that isolation is a big problem in itself. And then secondly, man, I feel really bummed that that this happened. Um, let's talk about a few things. So yes, I'm definitely not, I'm no psychologist, psychiatrist, or anything, but insomnia has a lot to do with psychology. So I'm learning a lot, and I think I have some meaningful things to share here. A couple of things. One is, it sounds like you quit. Which sounds to me as if, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but that there was a lot of pressure to like keep this job, do the job, and that pressure caused a lot of trouble sleeping. And then to kind of get rid of that pressure, that inability to sleep while trying to maintain and do well at job, made you decide to quit, which I think it's important to point out that it wasn't necessarily like that you were let go, or you did some kind of terrible mistake, and you were you couldn't work there anymore. It was like a decision, which I hope can install at least some hope that as long as as long as this pressure can come off, then I can sleep well and do a job. Meaning, if I think it would have been even worse if somebody has said you can't work here, because then I think that could have had even more impact on your confidence. Now, it's I just had a conversation with somebody else the other day that I think really applies here, and this other person was somebody who had a very like kind of demanding job, and was telling me that he was really hoping to sleep more so he could do the job better. And when I thought about that, I thought about the following: that if the more things that become dependent on how we sleep, the more sleep becomes put on this pedestal, and the more unattainable it gets. Like, the more things that we feel depend on how we sleep, the harder it becomes to get that sleep. And I think that's exactly what you're saying here, of course. And how do we deal with that? Well, I think um, it becomes about finding evidence that sleep is not what determines all these things. For example, you know, uh, you may think that if I'm not really funny or pleasant or optimistic, then my friends, because I'm not sleeping well, then my friends won't want to be with me or be my friend. Well, is there any maybe you can find evidence to the contrary. Maybe you can, when you, I don't know exactly how, but uh, maybe like talking to people, or like despite how you've slept, meeting people and find that, you know what, I didn't sleep well yesterday at all, but I actually had a good time with this person, this friend of mine. That can become like some evidence that shows that even if I don't sleep very well, I can still have a good time and people still want to be my friend. And that can become like the crack in this like construct of like how sleep is so important, that can make the whole thing crumble. Same thing with work. If you, anybody else listening here, if you can come up with an example of when you didn't sleep well and you still were able to do your job and focus and function, then you have kind of like proof that all does not hinge upon sleep, and that becomes a crack in that construct. So, so I hope this was helpful, and I'm learning more about this, and I'll share more and more as we go along. But again, of course, thanks for sharing this, and hope that that you will find another job, and that maybe can work on, like, this whole thing about like not putting so much pressure on sleep, and finding that you can function well even a little sleep, and things like that could help you get a job, keep the job, and then you know what? Then the whole thing can, like, how insomnia becomes like a negative spiral, but it can spiral backwards too. Little by little, you can find that, you know what, people actually like me despite my trouble sleeping. That builds some sleep confidence. I can do this job even if I sleep it, and then it kind of rewinds. It unwinds is the word I'm looking for. Unwinds the negative spiral. So yeah. Okay, thanks so much everyone for commenting. It is so helpful because other people probably have exactly the same kind of questions, and it's so important to talk about it. So thanks everyone, and I will be back with more, maybe even tonight, if not tomorrow. Until then, take it easy. Bye bye.